there's a Latin phrase, idea sunt magna immensus, which is ideas are great, but execution is immense. Act.
You know, if you're spending $500,000 and you're spending more time researching for an Airbnb for your next holiday than for buying a property, then you have a problem, you know?
I love Ferraris, like love. So if I was in the Ferrari room, my interest level showroom would be 100%. My wife would kill me if I came home with a Ferrari. So my intent is quite low.
If you go into a display suite as a buyer, you're saying there's a strategy about the stock release. Knowing this, what can a buyer do to kind of get the best deal still?
Well, great to have you guys. Couple of real experts in the field today. Welcome back to Property Now. I'm your host, Michael Carboni. My friends call me Carbs. I'll introduce you first, Sav. The listeners and viewers know who you are, our customer expert.
Thank you for having me back.
Always good. You're always ready to go, and I can always rely on you. So thank you for joining us.
No, pleasure.
Today we're talking AI and data, two real hot topics. And I guess, as everyone knows, we bring in the industry experts. We've got some real heavies today in this topic to give some insights from the industry perspective and help buyers understand how they can use this sort of information and make it work for them. So very happy to say we've got Mark Bernberg from Array White Projects here with us today. Mate, I'm seeing you everywhere.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of these podcasts and guest speaking keynotes and things like that, so this must be just every day for you now.
Yeah, it's getting there. I think it's more AI than me, really.
You're a robot.
Yeah,
really
I am
actually
actually a bot.
sitting here with me.
Yeah, the real me's at home now, lying in bed.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, it's
that would
amazing.
be great.
I'm actually a female.
Mate,
There's a business idea.
this could be a whole nother podcast. Mat Djolic, HTag.
Hi.
Mate, Doctor Matt.
Yeah.
LinkedIn.
It's a completely different field, I guess, organizational psychology, but yeah, it was my passion projects, I guess.
Fantastic. I was hoping you'd say you're a doctor in AI. But,
No, well,
that's fine.
it's essentially, it was data collection and analytics for 10 years, both qualitative and quantitative, which sort of serves me well in what I do now, but it was just a side project. So I love having side projects.
Fantastic. No, that's awesome.
Thanks for inviting me, mate.
No, great to have you both here. Obviously from maybe the buyer or the agent side, real estate agent side. Mark, how are you seeing, I mean, you've been in the game for how long now?
Coming up in 10 years.
10 years. Obviously the game has changed and the way we're using AI and data has really accelerated, especially in the last couple of years. How are you seeing the changes in the field?
To be honest, we're not. I think property sometimes lags other industries quite a bit. It's it is one of the oldest industries. It's also, potentially the biggest purchase that most people make as an asset. Yeah. So I actually think it's been quite slow.
Yep.
And if you look at other industries that have been massively accelerated and disrupted by technology, I think property has to a certain extent. And, people like you guys, Co-Posit is shaking up the industry, but it takes time, right? And property moves slowly. I think what we are seeing now is with AI being such a buzzword and exploding so fast and changing so quickly. I mean, literally, we can't even keep up. I think there is that disruption is happening whether people wanted to or not.
Yep.
And where we're seeing a huge disruption is being able to now quantitatively understand what buyers are doing and be able to, almost in real time, be more agile in adapting to those behaviors.
So that it is good and bad in a way because you can, I guess we understand as well, the property industry does move slow. And I always say from a marketing perspective, there hasn't been massive change since Meta advertising began. Like everyone seems to do the same kind of things. And we're sort of an industry that goes, oh, well, it's worked in the past, so let's continue to do it. So there's benefits in that you can be ahead of the game.
For sure.
Which I think you guys are doing right now. There's also, I guess, the negative is that the industry is hesitant to take on the advice or the feedback. But for the ones that do, there's huge benefits. What are you seeing from a buyer behavior perspective? Or what sort of advice are you giving the developers that you're working with at the moment?
So we developed, outside of Ray White, with my partners who are all ex-McKinseys, we developed an AI platform called Primax. And, Primax is really about understanding buyer behaviors so that developers have quantitative data to make decisions that right now are very subjective.
Yep.
So right now, if we were launching a project, in the Flower Mall area here and there was 50 apartments, an agent would run a campaign, a registration of interest or whatever, and then they would give the developer subjective feedback. Oh, we really think this is strong. We're getting a lot of heat here. And what we realized is that, because I can say it as a real estate agent, you always want to show the developer what they want to see.
Yep.
And we realized pretty quickly that there was a real disconnect between what buyers were doing and how developers were then allocating stock, releasing stock, and I think where it's shifted quickly now is we are using AI to capture data points that we can then sit down in front of a developer and say, quantifiable data, objective data that has nothing to do with me, that's saying, hey, look, here is the heat map of your 50 apartments. Here's where we're seeing a lot of interest. Here's where we're not seeing interest, and that's just a fact. And we would now use those data points with AI to drive like a Monte Carlo simulation. Okay, well, we're going to release X, Y, and Z. How does that look from a GR perspective? Then we're going to release ABC. How does that look? And so we can now use the tools that are in market with AI to actually create strategic launch maps now that we can go back to developers and go, right, keep these off market, increase the GR of these, decrease those. Let's hold these back. Let's give these to your channel partners. Let's give these to retail.
Amazing.
And so developers can now go into these environments getting the right balance between momentum, which we call sales velocity, and price.
Yeah.
Because quite often you could have huge momentum, so you get to a launch and your stock flies off the shelf. Amazing, but you've probably left a lot of money on the table.
Yep.
Or you can have a launch and nothing moves because it's too expensive. And I think where data is really now giving developers more power is taking the behavioral inputs. And I loved what you said earlier. Every data point is a behavioral input, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's taking those behavioral inputs and presenting them at least in a structured basis that developers can start to make qualitative decisions from quantitative data.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. You can ask.
I'm really interested. So,
great.
do you see patterns across locations? So, for example, if you collect information on behavioral patterns for a certain development, would you see that replicated in other locations, or does it change on the basis of a location?
Great questions. Our hypothesis was behaviors would be the same.
No, I would say changes.
And what we've started to see now is changes not only in areas but like regional versus metro.
Yeah.
And how behavior changes. Not only, our platform is mobile first, then onto desktop for bigger views of floor plans, plates, and everything. And just seeing the shift, even in a regional basis, of people going straight to desktop. Whereas, in the metro cities, more mobile active, a lot more mobile traffic than onto desktop. So we've seen significant shifts in behavioral patterns in certain areas. So, as an example, areas that are dominated by owner occupiers and a much older generation, probably less likely to take up the tech. Yep. Areas in metro areas like, new development areas where, work from home opportunities and connections, transport, huge uptake. So definite differences.
And I guess that's where the AI comes in to actually, collect and decipher all of that information, because otherwise it would have been hard. But I also think that the location reflects different behavioral purchasing patterns. So that's why I was interested in that aspect of it. Yeah.
Is that how you're using AI mostly, Matt, to collect and sort of cleanse the data? It's obviously going to happen a lot faster than if a human's doing it, or are there other ways?
No. So a couple of processes. So we have a team that collects and cleans the data, but the AI is mainly used to, I guess, reason. That's what the AI is. It's to reason upon or underlying data and the knowledge base. So now, as I mentioned previously, I guess the AI aspect of it that we're building is, I guess going a step back, let's say from an investor perspective or from the buyer's perspective, because those are the usual clients that we have. I think what is changing, for example, is that now people are becoming much more conscious of the purchase brief and why they're purchasing an investment property. Now, the purchase brief, essentially it's a deconstructed goal, but it has timeframes within, what returns do I need at 3-year mark, at 5-year mark, at 10-year mark, and having a lot of data sets and data points, you can sort of, delineate that. But the AI would take, I guess, the needs of the individual and then the large data sets spanning back 50 years to construct a reasoning narrative and provide examples that, or areas or selections of properties that people actually need to invest into to reach their goals faster.
So you want to make X amount of dollars, this is what...
Yeah, so I mean, I always say property investing is a game of probability, not certainty.
Yep.
So what we're trying to do, we're trying to increase the probability of a particular outcome, So, and this is what, usually the mindsets that need to be changed. People think, okay, where's the next Perth? The market gives you what the market gives you at particular timeframes. So you're increasing the probability if you're approaching data from the vantage point of what the individual needs. What we usually see is that before, let's say currently on HTag you have 150 metrics. Not all metrics are created equally under the sun. And what people used to do is, let's say vacancy rates hold the same value as days on market or whatever it is. But if I'm focusing on cash flow strategies, then vacancy rate would have much higher significance than days on market or something else. So you have a lot of permutations there that you need to take account of in order to provide an outcome that has meaning and has a much higher probability. So that's what the AI can do. I mean, we do it now through certain comparison modules that we have on the platform, but the AI is much faster.
And look, I know you're not going to be 100% accurate. You already said increased probability, right? And I guess we can only base it off, like you said, the goals and also the data that we have. But if something changes in a year, then that will obviously affect the probability on a 3 or 5 year perspective. But how accurate are you seeing?
Yeah, so we're lucky. I mean, I've traded all asset classes under the sun, and personally. And we are lucky in property because of the illiquid nature of the asset class.
Yep.
And when asset is illiquid, that means when you establish trends, they're sort of enduring,
Yeah.
So it takes a long time to shift a certain trend. Let's say if you have a 5-year or 6-year established trend for something, it would take 2 or 3 years to actually change it if a shift happens.
Makes
so
sense, yeah.
you can sort of time it in that way. I would usually say that if you have a 5-year trend for a certain metric, it would take 2 years to essentially change it. So I'm repeating myself, but what I'm saying is that I can dramatically increase the probability that something will happen within those 2 years, Now you have trends that are 50 years or 20 years, and you sort of have to layer the information. Again, as I said, because of the significance of data, it's organized in a hierarchy.
Yep.
So you have data points that allow you to predict more.
Yep.
You have data points that allow you to predict less.
Yep.
And you got to organize it in that way and structure it in that way, again, to increase the probability. Now, it's a little bit complex, but you sort of trying to see what is a direct representation of purchasing behavior. I'll give you an example. So infrastructure spending, let's say, a lot of people assess the areas from the point of, there's a lot of infrastructure spending coming to the market. But then my question is, what is the time lag? What is the time lag between money being spent and that money permeating into the pockets of individuals, and then those individuals having improved ability to purchase also have the willingness to buy? Because there's a difference between ability and willingness. So the time lag is a factor, and if you have an equity extraction time frame of 2 to 3 years, the fact that somebody's spending a lot of money in a particular area, you don't know, whether that's going to affect it or whether it's going to give you that equity extraction time frame. So you have to first consider the metrics that are more direct representation of purchasing behavior.
Yep.
And structure it that way. Now, again, I love talking about it. I need hours to explain it.
Sorry, I've got plenty of time.
But to answer your question, I would say, I'll give you an example. So on our platform, we have equity extraction timeframes of 2, 3, and 4 years. Now, when I say equity extraction, that means a growth target of 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
So a growth target of 20 to 30% in 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. And it's been extremely accurate because of the liquid nature of the asset, that you can get there. I give myself, a band of 20 to 30%. I mean, if you enter a market that's already generating 10%, let's say generated 10% in the last year, you just have to pinpoint whether it's at the beginning of the hotspot cycle or at the end, If it's at the beginning, you're nearly guaranteed, 30% in 3 years. So you just need to layer it in a particular way. And that's what's changing, I would say. That's what hasn't been done before, yeah.
Very interesting.
It's so incredible.
Yes.
I've got to say something. So one of our algorithms on the site where we can differentiate now buyer interest versus intent.
Okay.
And the way that I like to describe interest versus intent is I love Ferraris.
Yep.
Like love. So if I was in the Ferrari room, my interest level would be 100%. My wife would kill me if I came home with a Ferrari. So my intent is quite low.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because we've been trying to understand, the holy grail is if 100 people come to the site, 100 buyers, who are the highest intent buyers,
Yes.
and who are the looky-loos. And it's so funny because we have a formula, a very basic formula. It gets much more extracted out, but just for the purposes of today, where we say buyer intent is equal to interest divided by ability times willingness. It's the exact two words that he just used, and there's big differences on that. That's why I started laughing.
Absolutely.
So we actually utilize those data points as part of an algorithm that's trying to understand your intent.
Yeah. It's huge though, right? Because I look at, respectfully, like the REAs and the domains of the world. They got so much data. And I get emails every quarter from REA telling me that, 12 million people view their website or app per month. I'm one of those people, but I'm not buying right now.
Absolutely.
I just look every day to see what's going on in my area, if there's anything interesting, et cetera, et cetera. So that intent versus, it makes so much sense, and it's hard to.
I usually tell people. Sorry to cut you off.
It's fine.
Usually tell people, let's say buy and search index, is an indicator. I say, how many degrees of separation is there between you searching for an area and actually buying in it? Probably 15. So how significant is that data point? It's again, you have a lot of areas. I'll give you another example, employment rates and medium incomes.
Yep.
So people will approach the appeal of the area on the basis of how much people are earning within that area. But, higher incomes don't actually translate to long-term price growth. You have areas such as Newman in WA with pretty much the highest median wage in Australia, and yet the area has seen negative 50% growth in a decade. Why? Because it's a centralized industry. And there's higher volatility when you go through macroeconomic changes. When the industry in question is affected, you reduce the purchasing power, and then the prices drop. So the fact that the people are actually earning a lot does not mean that will translate to purchasing, price growth, etc. So that's a huge difference between willingness and ability.
So there's a lot to take in. You both mentioned data points and that there's so many, but can you break it down? Give us some specific data points that you guys look at. What are the ones? What are the most important ones what do you feel are the most important data points that you're measuring at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's not one data point.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of data points. And again, to Matt's point, spot on. So it's actually listening to myself. So all we're there to do is increase the probability. We say to developers, we are not a magic wand. We are not a magic genie. I can't come along and say, hey, well done, there we go. I'm going to guarantee to sell your 50 units to these people. All we can do is say there's so much data. And in today's world with machine learning, and there's a huge difference between machine learning and AI.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that, it's great to have an expert in the room, but, even with machine learning, which is taking huge amounts of data and allowing a machine to learn from that data and to give you what it thinks in terms of trends and outputs, but then to be able to take those trends and outputs and look at those data points and say, well, how does that improve my probability of, for example, our holy grail is to get to 95% probability on intent. Mm-hmm. We will never get to 100.
Yeah.
Because I'm not Matt. I'm not in his head. I don't know what's going on. Like he said, there could be 15 steps. He could have done 14 of them. And then the last step is, his wife comes on and goes, no, I hate this area.
Yeah.
We can't control that. So I think if we can get to 95% to increase probability, that's the holy grail. Because then what we're starting to do is actually saying, well, who are, out of every 100 leads that come in, who are the 10 we should be really focusing on?
Yeah.
To, again, increase the probability of conversion of sale. And then if we can marry the data that we're getting now on apartments and say, well, hang on, let's have a look at the data. Because I think the days of we just launch a block and, on launch day, most of the time what happens is a developer sits in their boardroom going with a sales agent, all right, well, let's hold that building and let's release that building and let's do every second level.
Yeah, why?
You might as well put a blindfold on and go to launch. Whereas we're about actually, let's get the data and let's let the data help us in raising the probability of successful conversion.
So, Mark, are you prepared to go through a real example with us? So we've got a project together, or there's a project utilising Composite that you're selling on out in Auburn Square, and it's all making sense now because when we first spoke about it, you said, oh yeah, we're going to hold off for channels at first and then we're going to move it. Are you prepared to talk about some of the strategy behind it, the thinking behind it?
For sure.
It's a real life scenario.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we've become quite strong on is that developers make money once they go to sell essentially in two ways. One, they sell for a higher price or they lower their cost of sale. And when I mean cost of sale, if you look at retail, so, having people from our agency on the floor, what is it? 2, maybe 2.5, maybe 3% commission. When you start bringing in channels and the third party agents, that can be 4, 5, 6, even I've heard 7%. Add on top of that, any rebates, incentives, upgrades, or anything else that you're throwing in. And so that's what we consider cost of sale. So if you sold $1 million apartment and Matt, you're a channel and you have to pay him 5% commission, 3% rebate to the buyer, and maybe there's a bonus for the agent. So suddenly you're at 9%. So 90,000 out of your $1 million is going away. If we can use data to say, well, hang on a second, out of these 100 apartments, these 30 are getting huge, intense signals from the market. we not only think you could maybe make a little bit more on these, but maybe we don't even suggest releasing these right now. And if we are going to release, we're going to release a batch of them to set a watermark or a benchmark on pricing, but we're going to release that to retail at 2% commission, 1% incentive, just to nudge the velocity. And so suddenly you, Mr. Developer, are now selling at 3% on your best stock, 8% on your worst stock, because what happens without those data points, we go to market and all the best stock sells first at launch, which is normally the lowest price buying into a project. I mean, as investors, we would always be saying, if you are going to buy off the plan, and we're not getting into that today, the best time to buy is launch.
Yep.
Because you're going to get the lowest possible entry price, and then you hope that you're buying in an area where you're going to see price escalation.
You hope, or you might be able to enhance that probability.
Wow, I mean, absolutely.
I'm so excited to talk to you post this.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, like, this is super exciting. And we get asked a lot, like, where should I buy? So in terms of from the buyer's point of view, how can they utilize these tools and the data?
Yeah, it's so buying process can be split in two different domains. You have a deterministic game and an emotional game. Emotional game is more of a owner-occupier play. When I say an emotional game, you're buying in a certain area because you need certain characteristics within that area. Essentially, an interesting one that I'll mention is. I had a lady approach me to find, suburbs with the most pole dance studios, for example, because she's into pole dancing. Like, for example, it's an interesting example.
Good fitness exercise, apparently.
But the other side, the deterministic game, if you're an investor, it's essentially, what satisfies. So to answer the question, I never answer it directly, and people get annoyed. Is like. You need to buy in an area that satisfies your brief, and your brief is your goal. Essentially a deconstructed goal to the individual purchase. How much money do you need to make in the short term, long term, and all of those other things. Now, I always say, I think the term hotspotting in general has actually done more damage to the industry than good. Now, the reason why I say that is because it assumes and implies that my hotspot is your hotspot.
Yep.
And it's completely different. We have different budgets, different investment time horizons, different risk profiles, equity extraction timeframes. Are we in the accumulation stage or the expansion stage of our portfolio? Are we in consolidation stage? So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution and answer, which probably the listeners will be upset about. But, I think the primary thing in order to know where to buy is to understand your brief, and you have people that can help you with, and then analyze markets from that perspective.
But that makes so much sense, and I agree. Hotspot is such a bad
It's a loaded term. It's a loaded term
because you can hear anyone on TikTok or Instagram these days and say, "Yeah, Melbourne's the next hotspot."
Yeah,
and I'm hearing that a lot. But people
I cause witch hunts.
Yeah,
for example,
yeah.
every time I mention, I remember the Perth days. And the tendency of people, because, building businesses is based on marketing, and if I'm a buyer's agent or any other, person operating within that space, you're sort of promoting your own services and you're doing marketing campaigns and this is a hotspot. But nobody talks about an area in context of a particular brief, and this is why when people are talking about Perth, I always say, well, Perth might be a good investment opportunity, but for a particular individual, And I was against that whole notion, let's all go to Perth, which, again, I go 12 rounds on social media with people about,
But I think,
but even
then there's markets within markets.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And even so, Perth generally was about to boom for a long time. And, you look at Melbourne as an example, might be about to boom for a long time, and you can't really time that. But markets within markets are important. I'm interested in which suburb I should be looking at for pole dancing. Like can we just go back to
Central
that?
Coast Central Coast is on top of the list.
Central Coast.
I would have said Surfers Paradise would have been another place.
Yeah, I was going to say the Gold Coast.
No, it was a New South Wales search. It was an owner-occupied.
I just want to go back to something that Matt said, because I think
of
that's really important, is that it's the same for developers. Developers come and say, can you sell my building? And again, we go back to, well, what's your brief? For example, what's your pre-sales commitment? Do you have any financial hurdles? How much do you need to sell by when? Is there a price you have to keep this above? What are your long-term targets? So we also take a very adaptive approach of then feeding those inputs into Primax, so that part of the simulation has to be based on your scenario, because every developer is different.
1,000%, yeah.
Absolutely.
Some developers go, we don't need any funding. we want to maintain maximum price. So velocity is not as important to us. Well, that yields a different outcome. And some developers
Absolutely.
are going, I need $80 million in sale by March 26, because I need that money. Okay, well, that changes velocity then.
It makes so much sense. And that's why this podcast exists, because developers need to understand buyer behavior to have the right product, to sell the right product. And so that insight from the developers we can give back to the buyers, and it's just continuous.
Correct.
Because we want developers to be building things that people need.
Yes, but I'm thinking like if you go into a display suite as a buyer, you're saying that there's a strategy about the stock release. Knowing this, what can a buyer do to kind of not cheat this, but like get the best deal still?
Well, I always think that, again, it's such a hard question to answer because it depends on the buyer.
Yeah,
and it
okay.
depends on, even as an owner-occupier, do they need to move now? Is this something that they can wait 6 months for? Is there a certain area they need to be near mum and dad, or they need to be near a sick auntie or something like that? So it's hard to say, okay, for every single buyer, do this, because it depends. And I know, I'm sorry, it's also going to be irritated by the answer, but it really does depend on the data.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that, if you've done your research, and we can't say that enough, like do your own research. You're spending, what, $1 million? This is not a Labubu that you're just going to go out and buy for $50.
I just learned about Labubus.
I also learned about
They're
Labubus.
selling-
Lafufus and Labubus.
Yeah.
I know, my marketing manager was like, she had
They
these
go
things
for a
hanging off her
couple
bag.
hundred.
I'm like,
Oh, I'm behind. I haven't
I'm
heard
like,
of
what are
that
these
before.
teddy bears?
They're very
Take it offline.
Take it offline.
But it's a big purchase. It's a big decision. So the first thing is do your own research. The second thing is, look for opportunities to gain an advantage. We always say, if you found an area that works and you like a builder and you like a development, get in at launch. Get in as fast as you can, because prices will be ramped up from there, and there's always an opportunity to do better. I'm not going to get into the debate of off the plan versus non off the plan, because
We'll save that for next time.
that's another story. I think wherever you are as a purchaser, do your own research. And then we always say to people, have your non-negotiables, because you are never, ever, I'm not saying never, ever, you shouldn't say that, but it's highly unlikely and unprobabilistic that you're going to find the perfect property that ticks every single box you have. So we always say, what are the 3 biggest boxes that have to be ticked? And then what are you prepared to compromise on? And then it comes down to, just as Matt was saying, what are your goals? Even as an owner-occupier, this is a starting point for me to get into the property market, or this is an upsize. I see myself for the next 5 to 10 years. You have to have sort of data points of your own that you can then use to make smarter decisions. I don't know if I've answered your question or been even more.
No, it's good.
I forget what the question was.
No,
It's interesting. It's interesting. You actually use. Just realizing as well. You sort of use the same thinking process. I say the same thing. There's no perfect area. There's no perfect investment opportunity. You need to understand what you can compromise on and what you can't. On the basis of data, your goals, etc. So we use the same thinking process, just at a more aggregate level. I would say the suburb level, and then you go into the property stuff. Yeah.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think with a lot of property buyers and investors, they always think about the one that could have been better, but you're never going to know as well. So I think, like you said, if you do your research, you understand the data, and you make a decision that's right for you, then you can't go too far wrong, I suppose, if you're doing it right.
Only a fool trips on what's behind him.
Exactly.
Like, you can't change what's done. You can learn from it. I always say to people, either lose and lose, or lose and learn the lesson.
Yep.
So if you've made a mistake from a property perspective, maybe next time you need to go, Matt, maybe get some more data. Maybe stop winging it and listening to your Uber driver, and go to professionals that have the data that, I think that's the other side of it, is people, they want success and they want high probability of success, but I'm not sure if I want to pay for it.
But they're in their own way as well, what I've realized. I mean, I do strategy sessions with clients, and it's interesting that they want to invest in property, and then they're trying to look for a small excuse not to do it, but not consciously. It's subconscious. And they're trying to find, because they're scared of, again, it's, you mentioned...
such a big price point?
Well, it's interesting. There's 2 factors. So, for example, the methodology that we teach is, I would say it's simple, but, it's novel and a little bit complex when you see it for the first time. And people complain, okay, what does it have to be this complex? And coming back, what you said, it's, if you're spending $500,000 and you're spending more time researching for an Airbnb for your next holiday than for buying a property, then you have a problem, So that's one side where people don't want the complexity but want an outcome. And there needs to be a level of complexity if you're spending a certain amount of money, Then the other side is people are in their own way. I mean, you mentioned probability and 95% probability. I mean, nothing is perfect. By implying that we're working on probability, we're inadvertently saying that there's no perfection. Okay, and if you're trying to make a decision in any, I make a sandwich and I can't put a perfect amount of sauce in the sandwich anyway. I mean, everywhere you look, everything that you do around you, essentially there's no perfection. It doesn't exist. And if you make financial decisions on those bases, you got to do the research and you got to tick the boxes, But you're never gonna. You have to make the leap. And people actually are in their own way. It made me realize, why some people are successful, why some are not. And my younger years, I used to assume that, it is mainly because their cards were better, circumstances were better. It's actually not the case. It's just that the successful people know when to make a decision and they make it. And that's it. Investors usually, they're just, as I said, in their own way. They're scared of, what am I? I go through hours and hours of hand-holding and we finish everything and we go through so much information and then a person says, but what about this? And sometimes I say, I don't think property investment is for you.
Wow.
Just don't do it.
It's the same with owner-occupiers, to be honest with you. We see the same. We have people who've come to us who've been looking for 8 months, 9 months. And you show them that in the last 9 months, if you'd bought 9 months ago, you'd actually be close to 5% up already. And then they go, okay, right, we got to make a decision. And then you show them something that ticks 9 out of 10 boxes. And maybe the third bedroom is half a meter too small. And you're like, if you spend another 9 months looking to find your 10 out of 10, which I don't think they find, because they'll find something that's not a 10 out of 10, you just lost another 5%.
I just don't understand the lack of self-reflection.
It's when emotion comes into play sometimes,
Correct.
Especially from the owner-occupier perspective.
But and the first-time investors. We find people that are buying investments for the first time.
Probably even more, actually.
They are like first-time buyers.
Yeah, probably even more for owner-occupiers because it is more of an emotional game. Yeah. It's not a deterministic game. So it's just, I find that very interesting. And it's the biggest hurdle for them to, realize their goals, essentially.
That's what my wife and I did. When we bought the home we live in at the moment, it was there were emotional decisions involved because we've got a family. We want our kids to grow up in an area, go to certain schools. We've got our friends in the area, and so. But our emotional decision was also based on, okay, what is the best thing we can buy here in this area? So it came back to personal goals. We want to be here. What's the best thing we can buy here? And I think that's important too. So using the emotion in the right way and being able to execute on that decision too. We had to move very quickly to get the best thing in that area.
You got to act.
In our price point anyway. There's a lot better in my area than my house, trust me. But we did what I believe we did the best we could in our situation, and I think that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
The same, yeah. I think for me as well. Like I was looking within a certain area, first home buyer. My daughter is going to the school in the local area, and I was like, there has to be within this price point. So that kind of narrowed down. Yes, but I just wonder, in like hindsight, if there was certain data that I could have utilized to make a better decision. Maybe I would have waited, but.
Well, what can buyers utilise? I'm guessing HTag is one. How do people come to you, and what what would that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, there's multiple channels. In addition to the platform itself, we have a mastermind community where I coach people how to do data analysis. Essentially, it's a subscription-based service. They will subscribe to the service depending on the level of subscription. They get certain levels of coaching as well, and it's essentially I tried to. Well, force is the wrong term, but I can't think of a better one, force individuals to exert some effort, because I think I'm very big on education, because I want our customers to go away and actually learn something so they can do it themselves. It stays with them forever, And again, you subscribe, you will go through a series of mini courses, and I'll coach you along the way and tell you what I would change and why I would change it. And I think, let's say we sort of operate in different domains, but if you're a buyer's agent, you have to explain your position. Now, there is a tendency for buyer's agents to assume that a customer that is clueless, not all of them, some of them I would say, there is a clear division between B2B and B2C, So they believe that if the customer knows less, their service is perceived in a better light, and I think that's a complete misconception. You want a customer to be educated, and in order for a customer to be educated, you have to educate them through the journey, because you're creating more sticky points, more trust, you're increasing the referrals. So even for the buyer's agents, you know, I enjoy that the most. Given my academic background as well, I coach them how to explain their position. Let's see, if you're raising kids, you know, you just don't say, I'm not equating buyer's agents to kids, but I'm saying you don't say, don't do this because I said so. Yeah. You know, you want to develop that critical aptitude of thinking. You know? So you say, don't do this because of this, this, and this. And that's the main, I guess that's the main aspect of HTag. It's not just data, it's the narrative, it's the logic, you know. And once you have that, you can explain your position to clients, you can increase level of trust. And it's interesting about value provision, you know, like a lot of people think that if I run a business, if I provide or give out all of my secrets and value, people will not, you know, come to me. Essentially, you're essentially going to increase the volume of referrals, because the way the mind works is that if you teach me something, I'm always going to think, and I try to do it myself, I'm always going to think that I've missed something because of the perceived competence I see in you. So I come back to you, you know. There's always going to be an element of, maybe I'm not doing it wrong, so I'll come back. So I think that educating aspect, from my perspective, you know, is big at HTag, and this is what we provide. And it just comes, you know, it essentially comes in a subscription form, but it's more like on-demand course kind of thing.
So if someone wanted to subscribe, where would they go?
It would just be htag.com.au, essentially, or Mastermind.
We'll add that to the show notes. Do you help out with, personal question, do you help out with commercial property as well?
Not yet. Reason, again, one of the questions was what are the main data points? And one of the main data points with us is data accuracy. And data accuracy is based on volume, you know, machine learning, coming back to that. So with commercial property, there's not enough volume for us to extrapolate trends, you know. So and it's a different ball game, and it's one ball game that I'm not competent in. So I would need to first upskill. That's one side of things, you know, and then, which is fine. But I think the data volume is critical there, and it's a problem that we have to solve. So
great. Thanks for the honesty. You know, that's perfect.
Yeah,
Mark, you can pitch to developers who might be listening to this, or do you want to talk about composite projects that you guys are selling?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been believers in composite from right at the very beginning, when you guys were still quite small, and now you're a big business. We think it's a fantastic opportunity for both first-home buyers and investors to keep your powder dry. And you know, everybody complains how hard it is to get into the market, and you know, my attitude is just go and find a composite project and get in. I'm the strongest believer in all time of that. No one times the market; it's time in the market. Just get in. You know, while I know that, you know, I'll be doing you a disservice, you know, go and speak to professionals and work out which area, but don't spend 5 years figuring that out, because, you know, I couldn't say it more. Like, there's a Latin phrase, idea sunt magna immensus, which is ideas are great, but execution is immense. Act. You know, get some data and make a decision and get in, and Composite really allows you to help that. But for the developers, I would be saying, you know, go home, go find your Qantas blindfold that they gave you when you flew, put that on, because that's what other agencies are showing you. We are a data-led agency. We're obsessed with it. And while we can't guarantee results, I know that if I've got data, you know, I think it was Peter Drucker, he's that management consultant. He says, what can be measured can be improved. We can measure the data and allow developers to improve velocity, price, momentum, engagement with the market. We will never guarantee them anything, and any real estate agent that's doing that doesn't know what they're talking about, because, you know, markets can shift on a dime.
Exactly. But it's all about the probability, right? And
correct. And so to developers out there, we would say, come and have a chat with us. Let us show you the Primax system. It works for launch, and then while you're actually selling, and let the data start to educate you and empower you, because I think developers also, with more data, are more empowered. and then can cut through maybe some of the riffraff that comes from real estate agencies and other people.
Perfect. My favourite episodes are when the guests start asking each other questions, because it makes it easier for me, but also I think our listeners and our viewers are going to get a lot more out of that as well. So I appreciate the conversation. I think you guys are going to become best friends. But thank you for joining us.
Ferraris, by the way, as well.
Me too. I just wish I could buy Ferraris. If my wife's watching, please.
I'm sure she is, and we'll see you guys next time.
This is Jason He, the sexiest voice in property, here to tell you that the Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.